Welcome, weary dreamer, to a place where history wears silk robes, whispers secrets through candlelight, and occasionally forgets its pants. Tonight and every night we tiptoe through the velvet corridors of medieval royalty, where kings were not just powerful, but profoundly, delightfully, disturbingly perverted. These are the bedtime tales they never taught in school. From brothels hidden in palaces to monarchs who married their mistresses and sometimes their horses, this is your nightly descent into the scandalous lullabies of history. So fluff your pillow, dim the lights, and prepare to be gently horrified. And if you enjoy drifting off to tales of royal debauchery, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the little bell, because nothing says sweet dreams like a king who thought he was made of glass. Now, let's begin. Charles II of Spain was born in 1661, but his genes had been playing musical chairs for centuries. The Habsburg dynasty, famous for its jawlines and questionable marriage choices, had been interbreeding like a royal knitting circle. Cousins married cousins, uncles married nieces, and Charles, he was the final product of this genetic blender. His lower jaw jutted so far forward he couldn't chew properly. His tongue was too large for his mouth. He had trouble walking, talking, and most tragically, for a king reproducing. His court physicians described him as short, lame, epileptic, senile, and completely bald before 35. Charming. But Charles was king, and kings must marry. The marital his first wife, Marie Louise of, was young, beautiful, and utterly miserable. She spent most of her time crying, praying, and trying not to look directly at Charles. Their marriage lasted 10 years. No children, no joy, just a lot of awkward dinners and whispered prayers. After Marie Louise died, possibly of sheer despair, Charles married Maria Anna of Neuburg. She was chosen for her fertility, which was ironic, because Charles's body was about as fertile as a salted desert. Still, Maria Anna tried. She even brought her own team of fertility experts, including priests, physicians, and one very optimistic astrologer. Spoiler, it didn't work. Royal remedies and magical mishaps. Desperate to fix his situation, Charles turned to medicine. And by medicine, we mean medieval nonsense. He drank potions made from crushed pearls, bathed in deer blood, and once wore a necklace filled with powdered mummy. Yes, mummy. As in ancient Egyptian corpse, he also underwent exorcisms. One priest claimed Charles was possessed by 5 demons, 2 of which were specifically targeting his reproductive organs. The exorcism involved holy water, chanting, and a very confused goat. Still no heir. The court of whispers while Charles struggled. His court buzzed with gossip. Nobles whispered about his impotence, his twitching fits, and his tendency to stare blankly at walls for hours. Foreign ambassadors sent letters home describing him as a walking corpse and a king in name only. Spain, meanwhile, was falling apart. The empire was crumbling, the treasury was empty, and the king was busy trying to impregnate his wife with the help of powdered mummy and goat-blessed holy water. The sleepy legacy Charles II died in 1700, childless, exhausted, and still twitching. His death triggered the War of Spanish Succession, a massive conflict that reshaped Europe. But tonight, we remember him not as a political figure, but as a tragic bedtime tale. A king born of too much love between cousins. A man who tried everything to fulfill his royal duty, from deer bloodbaths to demon banishments. And a reminder that sometimes, history is less about glory, and more about joy. Edward II was born in 1284. The son of the legendary Edward I, also known as Longshanks, a man so tall and terrifying he once banned laughter at court. Edward II, by contrast, was soft, romantic, and deeply uninterested in warfare. He preferred music, architecture, and the company of one man, Piers Gaveston. Piers wasn't just a friend, he was Edward's obsession. Handsome, witty, and dangerously charming, Gaveston was showered with gifts, titles, and lands. Edward made him Earl of Cornwall, title usually reserved for royal blood, and gave him a seat at the king's table, literally, at every feast. The nobles were not amused. The queen, who wasn't. Edward married Isabella of France, daughter of the French king and a political powerhouse in her own right. She was beautiful, intelligent, and absolutely furious that her husband preferred Gaveston's company to hers. At their wedding, Edward reportedly ignored Isabella and spent the evening laughing with Piers. He even gave Gaveston all the wedding gifts, including the jewels. including the ones meant for Isabella. This did not go over well. The noble revolt, the barons, already irritated by Gaveston's arrogance, finally snapped. They demanded his exile. Edward agreed, then secretly brought him back. This happened multiple times. Gaveston was exiled, recalled, exiled again like a royal boomerang. Eventually, the nobles took matters into their own hands. In 1312, they captured Gaveston, dragged him to a lonely hillside, and executed him without trial. Edward was devastated. He wore mourning clothes for months and refused to speak to anyone. But Isabella, she was just getting started. The downfall. Edward never recovered from Gaveston's death. He turned to other favorites, most notably Hugh Despenser the Younger, a man so greedy he made Gaveston look humble. Despenser seized lands, bullied nobles, and may have had a romantic relationship with Edward as well. Isabella, fed up and politically savvy, teamed up with her lover Roger Mortimer. Together, they launched a rebellion. In 1326, they invaded England, captured Edward, and forced him to abdicate in favor of his son. Edward was imprisoned in Berkeley Castle, and then, things got dark. The red-hot rumor historians still debate how Edward II died. One infamous rumor claims he was murdered with a red-hot poker, inserted in a place no bedtime story should describe in detail. The idea was to leave no visible marks. Whether true or not, the tale stuck. It's the kind of story that makes you wince, and then yawn. The sleepy legacy. Edward II was a king who loved deeply, ruled poorly, and paid the price for both. His story is a lullaby of longing, a tale of forbidden affection, political chaos, and one very unfortunate ending. Henry VIII wasn't born to be king. His older brother Arthur was the heir, but Arthur died young, leaving Henry the throne and, awkwardly, Arthur's widow. That widow was Catherine of Aragon, Henry's first wife. She was regal, devout, and unfortunately, unable to produce a male heir. Henry tried, oh how he tried. But after years of miscarriages and one surviving daughter Mary, Henry grew restless. And then he saw Anne Boleyn. Anne Boleyn, the flirt who changed England. Anne was witty, sharp-tongued, and refused to sleep with Henry unless he made her queen. Henry, smitten and impatient, broke from the Catholic Church just to marry her. Thus, the Church of England was born not from theology, but from royal horniness. Anne gave birth to Elizabeth, another daughter. Henry was disappointed. Then Anne had a series of miscarriages. Then Henry got suspicious. In 1536, Anne was arrested for adultery, incest, and witchcraft. The charges were flimsy. The execution was swift. She was beheaded with a sword. Henry's version of a breakup text. Wife number 3, Jane Seymour. The quiet one. Jane Seymour was gentle, obedient, and gave Henry what he wanted, a son. Edward VI was born in 1537. Jane died shortly after childbirth. Henry mourned her deeply, probably because she didn't live long enough to disappoint him. Wife number 4, Anne of Cleves, the Tinder mismatch. Henry saw Anne's portrait and thought she was gorgeous. Then she arrived in person and wasn't. He called her the Flanders mare. Their marriage was annulled after 6 months. Anne got a generous settlement and lived happily ever after without Henry. Wife number 5, Catherine Howard, the teenage disaster. Catherine was young, lively, and very bad at keeping secrets. She had affairs before and during her marriage to Henry. When the truth came out, Henry was furious. She was executed at age 19. Her last words were, "I die, a queen, but I would rather die the wife of Culpeper." Oof. Wife number 6, Catherine Parr, the survivor. Catherine Parr was smart, mature, and knew how to handle Henry's moods. She outlived him. Enough said. The king's body betrays him. By the end of his life, Henry was obese, riddled with gout, and had a festering leg wound that smelled so bad courtiers avoided him. He wore armor lined with fur and needed a crane to get on his horse. Romance was not in the air. He died in 1547, leaving behind 3 children, a fractured church, and a legacy of marital mayhem. The sleepy legacy. Henry VIII was a king of appetites, food, power, and women. His story is a lullaby of love gone wrong, of crowns traded for kisses, and of heads lost in the name of heirs. Louis XIV ruled France for over 72 years. He called himself the Sun King, because obviously the world revolved around him. He built Versailles not just as a palace, but as a stage where every glance, gesture, and outfit was part of a royal performance. He didn't just reign, he curated. Versailles, where privacy went to die. Versailles had over 700 rooms and zero chill. Courtiers lived in cramped quarters, elbowing each other for a glimpse of the king's morning routine. Yes, Lelevely waking up was a public event. Nobles fought for the honor of handing him his socks. Imagine being so powerful that people compete to dress you while you yawn. Fashion, flattery, and flatulence. To survive Versailles, you needed a powdered wig the size of a small dog, a fan for dramatic exits and subtle insults, the ability to compliment Louis while pretending not to notice his gas, which was frequent and legendary. Etiquette was everything. One wrong bow, and you were banished to the social equivalent of Siberia. The garden, affairs, intrigue, and perfumed letters. Louis had many mistresses, but Madame de Montespan was the Beyoncé of them all. She was witty, gorgeous, and allegedly dabbled in black magic to keep his love. Versailles was so scandalous that one affair involved love potions, poison, and a priest who moonlighted as a sorcerer. The affair of the poisons rocked the court. People whispered that nobles were hiring witches to eliminate rivals. Versailles was basically a soap opera with better lighting. Hygiene, optional. Despite the fountains and marble, Versailles was not fragrant. People rarely bathed. Perfume was used to mask the stench. Chamber pots were emptied out windows. The gardens were lovely, but the hallways, eau de regret. The sleepy legacy. Louis XIV died in 1715, leaving behind a palace of illusions and a country teetering on bankruptcy. His great-grandson would become Louis XVI, who, spoiler alert, would lose his head in a future chapter. Born in 1431, Vlad III was the son of Vlad II Dracul, a member of the Order of the Dragoner chivalric group. That sounds noble, but mostly involved stabbing Ottomans. Vlad Jr. inherited his father's title, his enemies, and a flair for theatrical violence. He would later be known as Vlad the Impaler. And yes, he earned it. Impalement, a sleepy explanation. Vlad's favorite punishment was impalement. Victims were seated on a sharpened wooden stake, which was then slowly driven through the body, often avoiding vital organs to prolong the agony. The stake was then planted upright, leaving the victim to writhe for hours, sometimes days. Vlad didn't just impale, he arranged his victims in patterned circles, forests, even spirals. One Ottoman envoy described it as a garden of corpses, sweet dreams. Dinner with the dead. One of Vlad's most infamous habits was dining among the impaled. He'd sit at a table, sip wine, and calmly eat roast meat, while hundreds of bodies twitched around him. He believed fear was the best deterrent, and he was right. Crime in Wallachia dropped dramatically, but so did tourism. The diplomatic disaster. When Ottoman envoys refused to remove their turbans in Vlad's presence, he had the turbans nailed to their heads. When nobles plotted against him, he invited them to a banquet, then had them all stabbed mid-meal. When peasants complained about poverty, he burned their village and told them to start over. Efficiency, maybe. Empathy, not so much. Dracula, rebranded. Centuries later, Bram Stoker would borrow Vlad's name and reputation to create Dracula. The vampire legend was born from Vlad's real-life thirst, not for blood, but for control. He didn't suck necks, he just made sure they were impaled at the right angle. The sleepy legacy. Vlad, the Impaler, died in 1476, likely betrayed by his own men. His head was sent to the Ottomans in a jar of honey. But tonight, we remember him not as a monster, but as a bedtime tale of medieval madness. No, not the famously inbred Charles II. We're talking about Charles II of England, the Restoration King who brought back monarchy, theatre, and a whole lot of mistresses. He was nicknamed the Mary, Monarchand Mary. He was especially when it came to physical affection. The royal harem. Charles had at least 13 known mistresses, including Nell Gwyn, a witty actress who called him Charles the Cheat when he forgot her allowance. Barbara Palmer, so influential she was nicknamed the Uncrowned Queen. Louise d'A, a French spy who seduced Charles and sent pillow talk back to Versailles. Charles didn't just flirt, he gave his lovers titles, estates, and sometimes entire palaces. His court was less Versailles, more Love Island. 17th century edition. Hands-on governance. Charles was known for his tactile diplomacy. He'd greet foreign dignitaries with a hearty handshake, a shoulder squeeze, and occasionally, a wink that made ambassadors blush. He believed in the healing power of touch. He performed the royal touch, a ceremony where he laid hands on people with scrofula, a skin disease, claiming divine healing powers. Spoiler, it didn't work, but it made for great PR. Theatre, wine, and wandering fingers. Charles reopened theatres banned by Puritans, filled them with bawdy plays, and often sat in the royal box with a mistress on each arm. He loved wine, wit, and women, and made sure his reign felt like one long after-party. He once said, "I am the King of England, and I do what I please," and please himself he did. The legacy of lust. Charles fathered at least 12 illegitimate children, many of whom became dukes and duchesses. He legitimized none but gave them wealth, titles, and influence. His actual heir, James II, was less charming and more Catholic, which led to a whole revolution. But Charles, he died peacefully in bed, surrounded by mistresses and murmuring apologies to his wife. Born in 1755, Marie was shipped off to France at age 14 to marry Louis XVI. She arrived with a smile, a dowry, and zero clue how to run a kingdom. But she did know how to run a closet. She became the ultimate trendsetter. Think of her as the Kardashian of Versailles, minus the Instagram, plus a guillotine. The wardrobe that wrecked a nation. Marie spent millions of livres on gowns, wigs, and accessories. Her hair was styled into ships, gardens, and once, a replica of a battlefield. Her dresses were so wide, she had to enter rooms sideways. She had a personal fashion house, Rose Burton, who designed outfits that made nobles swoon and peasants gag. Her favorite look, a silk gown, a towering wig, a tiny dog tucked under her arm, and a complete disregard for France's collapsing economy. The cake controversy. She never actually said, "Let them eat cake." That quote was likely propaganda. But she did host lavish parties while the poor starved. So, not exactly innocent. Her private retreat, Petit Trianon, was a countryside fantasy where she dressed as a shepherdess and played pretend peasant complete with porcelain cows. It was Versailles cosplay, and it did not go over well. Scandal, gossip, and the diamond necklace. Marie was blamed for everything. Bad harvests, national debt, and even a jewel heist she had nothing to do with. The affair of the diamond necklace, a scam involving a stolen necklace, ruined her reputation. Pamphlets called her Madame Deficit. Cartoons showed her as a harlot, and the people, they sharpened their pitchforks. The fall of the fashion queen. During the French Revolution, Marie was imprisoned, tried, and executed in 1793. Her final outfit, a plain white dress. Her final words, an apology for stepping on the executioner's foot. Even in death, she was polite and stylish. Reigning from 1520 to 1566, Suleiman wasn't just a conqueror, he was a poet, a reformer, and a man with a harem so vast it had its own postal system. His empire stretched across 3 continents, his heart mostly occupied by one woman. But we'll get to her. The harem, not just a pleasure palace. The harem wasn't just about intimacy, it was a political institution. It housed the sultan's mother, who basically ran the place. Hundreds of concubines, each trained in music, poetry, and etiquette. Eunuchs, who guarded the gates and managed the drama. Tutors, tailors, and astrologers. Because even seduction needs planning, women were selected from across the empire, educated, and ranked. Only a few ever saw the sultan's chambers. The rest, intrigue, alliances, and passive-aggressive embroidery. Enter Roxolana. The concubine who became Queen Roxolana, also known as Harem Sultan, was a Ukrainian slave who rose through the ranks to become Suleiman's legal wife. A scandalous move in Ottoman tradition. She was witty, strategic, and possibly a little terrifying. She wrote love letters, advised on politics, and allegedly orchestrated the downfall of rivals. She turned the harem into a chessboard, and she played to win. Bedtime bureaucracy. Suleiman didn't just pick a concubine at random. There were rotations, rankings, and rituals. The chosen woman would be bathed, perfumed, dressed in silk, and escorted by eunuchs to the sultan's chamber. If she bore a son, she gained status. If not, back to embroidery and passive-aggressive poetry. The sleepy details. The sultan's bedroom was a masterpiece of comfort. Rose-scented sheets, gold-threaded cushions, musicians playing lullabies, and sometimes a concubine reading him poetry before sleep. It was less 50 Shades, more ASMR. Ottoman edition. Born in 1533 to Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn, Elizabeth's childhood was a Tudor soap opera. Mother executed, declared illegitimate, survived plots, imprisonment, and sibling drama. But in 1558, She took the throne and never looked back. She ruled for 45 years, never married, and became known as the Virgin Queen. The celibate chess game. Elizabeth received marriage proposals from nearly every eligible royal in Europe. Her response: flirt a little, dangle the possibility, then ghost them harder than a 16th century Tinder swipe. She used her single status as a diplomatic weapon, keeping France, Spain, and Austria guessing, while maintaining full control. Her motto: I may have the body of a weak and feeble woman, but I have the heart and stomach of a king. The bed that no one shared. Elizabeth's bedchamber was sacred. She surrounded herself with ladies-in-waiting, poets, and spies, but no lovers. Rumors swirled about her closeness with Robert Dudley, but nothing was ever confirmed. Her chastity became legend. Her solitude, strategic, power, pageantry, and pearls. Elizabeth weaponized fashion. Her gowns were armor-layered, stiff, and dazzling. Her face was powdered white, her hair adorned with jewels. Her portraits showed her as ageless, divine, and untouchable. She became a living symbol of England itself, pure, powerful, and perpetually single. War, wisdom, and the Spanish Armada. In 1588, Spain sent its mighty armada to invade England. Elizabeth rallied her troops in full armor, delivering a speech that made grown men weep. England won. Elizabeth's legend was sealed. After years of Puritan rule under Oliver Cromwell, who banned Christmas, dancing, and joy in general, England was ready for a king who knew how to throw a party. Enter Charles II in 1660, sashaying back onto the throne like a man who just won the lottery and immediately spent it on champagne, wigs, and women. Charles wasn't just restoring the monarchy, he was restoring vibes. His court became a glittering den of excess, where poetry was seductive, politics were whispered over wine, and mistresses were practically a job title. The mistress menagerie. Charles didn't just have lovers, he had a mistress department, complete with unofficial rankings, pensions, and royal real estate. Let's meet a few of the stars of this scandalous ensemble. Barbara Villiers, tall, tempestuous, and utterly unapologetic. She bore Charles 5 children, and once stormed into Parliament to yell at MPs who insulted her. Charles gave her a palace. She gave him drama. Nell Gwynn, the people's favorite, a witty orange seller turned actress. Nell was beloved for her humor and humility. When mistaken for a Catholic mistress, she shouted, "I'm the Protestant whore," and won the crowd. Louise Day, the French import, elegant, calculating, and fluent in court intrigue. She was Charles's diplomatic mistress, sent by Louis XIV to keep England cozy with France. She succeeded very cozily. Charles had at least a dozen official mistresses, and countless unofficial ones. He fathered 17 acknowledged illegitimate children, which is impressive, exhausting, and deeply The court of velvet and Vice Charles's court was a sensory overload. Perfumed halls where gossip floated like incense, masquerade balls with masks, music, and mischief, secret passageways for discreet exits and even more discreet entrances. Poets and playwrights like Dryden and Afrobane, who turned royal affairs into verse. The king himself was a walking contradiction, charming yet cynical, generous yet manipulative. He loved science, dogs, and witty banter, but mostly, he loved being adored. The Spaniel King Charles's obsession with his King Charles Spaniels was legendary. He let them roam freely through court, even during state meetings. One ambassador complained that he couldn't concentrate with a small dog licking his boot. Charles shrugged. The dog stayed. He once delayed a royal decree because his favorite spaniel was asleep on the parchment. The bedchamber, as Sattlefield in Charles's reign. The bedchamber was more powerful than the Privy Council. Mistresses influenced foreign policy, appointments, and royal moods. A well-timed whisper in bed could change the fate of a noble family or doom it. Barbara Villiers once convinced Charles to exile a rival simply because she didn't like her shoes. Sleepy reflection. The velvet fog. Charles II ruled with laughter, lust, and a laissez-faire attitude that made him beloved and bewildering. He didn't care much for war or taxes, but he cared deeply about pleasure, poetry, and the art of being adored. Louis XV inherited the throne of France at age 5, and by adulthood, he was handsome, shy, and deeply allergic to responsibility. He preferred hunting, eating, and romantic escapades to ruling. Versailles, with its endless etiquette and stiff formality, bored him senseless. So, he did what any overstimulated monarch would do. He built a secret pleasure palace, the the Parc aux Cerfs, royal hideaway, or state-sponsored brothel. Behind the grandeur of Versailles lay a quiet house called the Parc aux Cerfs, Stag Park. It was discreet, luxurious, and staffed with young women selected for their beauty, charm, and ability to keep secrets. Louis XV would visit in disguise, often dressed as a commoner named Monsieur le Duc. Inside, he indulged in romantic escapism, far from the judging eyes of courtiers and queens. Some historians call it a private harem, others call it a logistical nightmare. Either way, it was real and royally scandalous. The girls of the park, the women of the Parc aux Cerfs, weren't just mistresses, they were part of a system. Recruited by intermediaries, they were housed, educated, and occasionally gifted pensions or arranged marriages after their service. One of the most famous was Marie-Louise Murphy, a 14-year-old Irish beauty whose portrait caught the king's eye. She became his favorite for a time, until she got too bold and tried to replace Madame de Pompadour. She was promptly married off to a nobleman and sent away. Madame de Pompadour, the official mistress who outsmarted everyone. Louis XV's most famous mistress wasn't in the Parc aux Cerfs. She ran the show from Versailles. Madame de Pompadour was brilliant, cultured, and politically savvy. Though their romantic relationship faded, she remained the king's closest confidant for years. She approved many of the Parc aux Cerfs girls herself. Yes, you read that right. She outsourced the romance so she could focus on art, architecture, and manipulating ministers. Versailles versus the velvet underground. While Versailles glittered with chandeliers and powdered wigs, the Parc aux Cerfs was candlelit, quiet, and intimate. Louis XV craved escape from the rigid court life and found it in whispered conversations, soft music, and scandalous rendezvous. He once skipped a major diplomatic meeting because he had a headache. The headache's name was Marie-Louise, and she was waiting in the park. The cost of indulgence. Louis XV's escapades weren't just personal, they were political. The French public grew resentful of royal excess, especially as poverty spread. Pamphlets mocked the king as Louis the Well-Beloved turned Louis the Well-Bedded. His reputation soured. His mistresses became symbols of corruption, and the seeds of revolution were quietly planted beneath silk sheets. Charles VI of France began his reign in 1380 with promise. He was young, handsome, and surrounded by capable advisors. But by his mid-20s, something cracked, not politically, but psychologically. He began to suffer from episodes of madness, during which he forgot he was king, fled from his own guards, attacked servants, believed he was made entirely of glass. Yes, glass, the glass delusion. Charles was convinced that his body was fragile, transparent, and dangerously breakable. He wore reinforced clothing, often padded with extra layers, and refused to be touched. He even ordered his furniture to be rearranged, so he wouldn't bump into anything. Courtiers tiptoed around him. Servants carried pillows in case he fell. Doctors scratched their powdered heads and prescribed prayer. The forest incident, one of Charles's most infamous episodes, occurred in 1392. While traveling through a forest, he suddenly drew his sword and attacked his own knights, screaming that they were traitors. Several were killed before he collapsed, trembling and confused. From that moment on, his mental health deteriorated rapidly. France, meanwhile, had no idea what to do with a king who thought he was a wineglass. Bedchamber of shadows. Charles's bedroom became a sanctuary of silence. He slept surrounded by cushions, refused light, fearing reflections, spoke only in whispers, occasionally stared at his hands for hours, convinced they were cracking. His wife, Isabeau of Bavaria, took over many royal duties, though she was more interested in court intrigue than caregiving. The political puzzle with Charles incapacitated, France fell into chaos. His uncles and cousins fought for control. England took advantage, launching attacks. The 100 Years' War raged on, while Charles sat quietly, afraid of shattering. His son, the future Charles VII, was kept away from court. His daughter married Henry V of England, further complicating loyalties. France was ruled by regents, mistresses, and madness. The court of pretend to maintain appearances. Courtiers pretended Charles was fine. They staged events he couldn't attend. They issued decrees in his name. They whispered behind fans and wrote letters in code. Versailles may have had drama, but Charles's court had delusion as policy. Sleepy reflection. The shattered crown. Charles VI died in 1422, after decades of mental decline. He left behind a fractured kingdom, a confused legacy, and one of the strangest chapters in royal history. Louis XIV didn't inherit a throne, he inherited a stage. From the moment he took power in 1643, he declared himself the center of the universe literally. He styled himself as the Sun King, and everything revolved around him. He built Versailles, not as a palace, but as a theater of control. Every hallway, mirror, and fountain whispered, "You are lucky to exist near me." The heels heard, round the world. Louis was short, but his ego, towering. To compensate, he wore custom red high heels, often up to 4 inches tall. Only nobles close to him were allowed to wear red solsa, literal status symbol, centuries before Louboutin. He strutted through Versailles like a runway model, his heels clicking like a metronome of power. The ballet King Louis didn't just attend ballets, he starred in them. He performed in over 30 productions, often playing gods, heroes, or celestial beings. His most famous role, Apollo, the sun god. Imagine a monarch in tights, pirouetting across a stage while ministers watched in silence, unsure whether to clap or cry. The clean illusion despite his glamour. Louis wasn't exactly hygienic. He bathed rarely, preferring perfume over soap. Versailles had few toilets, so courtiers relieved themselves in hallways, gardens, and behind curtains. Yet Louis insisted on ritual cleanliness, daily face washing with rosewater, elaborate wig, maintenance. A royal dentist who doubled as a gossip source. The waking ritual Louis's mornings were a public spectacle. Called the lever, it involved courtiers entering in ranked order, watching him wake, stretch, and dress, offering advice on stockings, wigs, and breakfast. It was less getting ready and more live-streamed monarchy. The political genius beneath the lace. Don't be fooled by the frills. Louis was sharp. He centralized power, weakened the nobility, and made France the dominant European force. He used fashion, ritual, and architecture as tools of control. Versailles wasn't just pretty, it was a gilded cage. Philip V of Spain, grandson of Louis XIV, inherited more than just royal blood. He inherited a spectacularly unstable mind. His reign, 1700 to 1746, was marked by brilliance, depression, paranoia, and a dinner table so silent it could make a monastery seem rowdy. He suffered from bipolar disorder, hallucinations, and long stretches of catatonic withdrawal. At times, he refused to speak for weeks. Other times, he believed he was dead. Yes, dead, and insisted on being buried, while still alive. The corpse King Philip's most infamous delusion. He believed he had died and demanded a funeral. He ordered his chamber to be draped in black priests, to perform last rites, courtiers to mourn him while he lay in bed. Motionless when they hesitated, he screamed, "I am dead, bury me." Eventually, they staged a fake funeral just to calm him down. He attended it, in bed. The silent supper. Philip's dinners were legendary not for the food, but for the rules. He demanded absolute silence during meals, no chewing sounds, no clinking of cutlery, no eye contact. Servants tiptoed. Courtiers held their breath. One unfortunate noble sneezed and was banned from dinner for a month. Philip believed sound disrupted digestion. He also believed soup had spiritual properties, and once refused to eat for days because the broth was emotionally aggressive. The royal hygiene ritual. Philip hated water. Bathing was rare. Instead, he rubbed himself with perfumed cloths, wore multiple layers to avoid drafts, slept under mountains of blankets. Even in summer, he feared cold air could steal his soul. Doctors prescribed fresh air. Philip responded by bricking up windows. The bed of eternal waiting. Philip spent much of his reign in bed, not lounging, ruling. He held court from beneath velvet sheets. Ministers knelt beside his mattress to deliver reports. He signed decrees with trembling hands, often while muttering to imaginary angels. His wife, Elizabeth Farnese, effectively ran the country. She was sharp, ruthless, and occasionally had to drag Philip out of bed to attend state functions. The musical cure. In one of his darkest episodes, Philip refused to speak, eat, or move. Doctors tried everything. Then someone suggested music. They summoned Farinelli, a famous castrato singer. Farinelli sang to Philip every night for years. The king began to recover slowly but surely. Farinelli became a fixture at court, serenading the monarch like a lullaby therapist. The political puzzle. Despite his instability, Philip's reign wasn't a total disaster. He strengthened Spain's military, reformed bureaucracy, and laid groundwork for future modernization. But his court was a circus of silence. ruled by a man who feared forks and flirted with death. Wenceslas IV of Bohemia reigned 1378 to 1419, was the kind of king who made courtiers nervous and tavern owners rich. Son of the mighty Charles IV, Wenceslas inherited a throne, a legacy, and absolutely no interest in either. He preferred wine over war feasts over diplomacy, falcons over finance. His reign was a chaotic blend of neglect, indulgence, and occasional imprisonment. Yes, he was locked up, twice, by his own nobles. The feast that never ended. Wenceslas turned his palace into a perpetual banquet. Every night was a festival. Every meal was a performance. He demanded roasted swans stuffed with figs, peacocks served with gold-dusted feathers, wine fountains in the garden. He once ordered a 24-hour feast to celebrate. Nothing just felt like it. Servants collapsed. Musicians wept. Wenceslas danced in his undergarments. The wine-soaked throne, Wenceslas drank like it was his divine right. He believed wine improved judgment. Spoiler, it didn't. He held council meetings in taverns, signed decrees, while tipsy appointed ministers based on drinking ability. One advisor was promoted after winning a chugging contest. Another was fired for refusing a third round. The madness beneath the merriment. Wenceslas wasn't just drunk, he was deeply unstable. He suffered from violent mood swings, paranoia, hallucinations. He once accused a bishop of sorcery and had him drowned in a wine barrel. Another time, he locked himself in a cellar for 3 days, claiming the rats were plotting against him. His court tiptoed around him. His enemies plotted. His allies drank. The bed of barrels. Wenceslas had a bizarre obsession with barrels. He slept near them. He bathed in them. He once held a diplomatic meeting inside one, claiming it made him feel secure. When asked about his foreign policy, he replied, "Let the wine flow, and the borders will follow." Spoiler, they didn't. The political collapse. Bohemia under Wenceslas was a mess. Nobles rebelled. Cities rioted. The Holy Roman Empire grew impatient. Eventually, he was deposed as king of the Romans. His own brother Sigismund took over much of the kingdom. Wenceslas didn't fight back, he just drank more. The barrel's end. Wenceslas died in 1419, found slumped beside a wine barrel. Some say he drank himself to death. Others say he was poisoned. Either way, his reign ended as it began, in vino veritas, and in velvet chaos. Justin II ruled the Byzantine Empire from 565 to 578 CE. He inherited a realm of splendor, intrigue, and constant war. At first, he was competent, even promising. But then, the chirping began. He suffered a mental collapse so dramatic, it turned Constantinople into a psychiatric case study. The descent begins. Justin's breakdown was triggered by endless wars with Persia, rebellions in Italy, religious schisms, and possibly too much palace pressure. He began to scream uncontrollably, laugh at funerals, bark orders in gibberish, and eventually chirp like a bird. The avian delusion. Justin believed he was a bird of paradise. He demanded feathered robes, birdseed at meals, courtiers to address him in chirps. He flapped his arms during council meetings. He perched on windows. He once tried to leap from a balcony, shouting, "I must migrate." Guards tackled him mid-flight. He squawked in protest. The nest of madness. Justin's bedchamber was transformed into a nest. Servants, lined it with silk feathers, played flute music to simulate forest sounds, brought him twigs for mental stimulation. He slept curled up, occasionally pecking at his pillow. Doctors were baffled. Priests were terrified. The royal treatment plan, desperate to calm him. Physicians tried cold baths, herbal tonics, exorcisms, a therapy involving puppets dressed as birds. Nothing worked. Justin once attacked a puppet, claiming it was mocking his plumage. Eventually, they resorted to music therapy, locking him in a chamber with harpists and incense. He chirped along. The empire on autopilot. While Justin nested, the empire was ruled by his wife, Empress Sophia, and a rotating cast of generals. She was sharp, diplomatic, and deeply embarrassed. She issued decrees in his name. She met foreign envoys while Justin squawked behind a curtain. She once apologized to the Persian ambassador for avian interference. The final molt. Justin II died in 578, after years of decline. His funeral was quiet, dignified, and notably free. Sophia banned bird imagery from the palace for a decade. Historians still debate the cause of his madness. But one thing's clear. He ruled not with an iron fist, but with a beak of bewilderment. Nero ruled the Roman Empire from 54 to 68 CE. He was young, charming, and obsessed with performance. He didn't want to be emperor, he wanted to be famous. He fancied himself a poet, a singer, an actor, a chariot racer, and occasionally, a god. His reign was less governance, more Greco-Roman reality show. The stage was his throne. Nero built theaters across Rome not for the people, but for himself. He performed tragedies in Greek songs about divine love, monologues about his own greatness. He forced senators to attend. They clapped, they wept, they prayed for early retirement. One noble allegedly faked his own death to avoid another performance. The celebrity horse Nero adored animals, especially his horse Procellus. He gave it a marble stable, gold-plated feed bucket, a personal servant. He once held a birthday party for Procellus, complete with musicians and cake. The horse wore a toga. Guests were required to toast its noble spirit. The Great Fire of Rome in 64 CE. A massive fire devastated Rome. Nero's response. He sang about the fall of Troy. He blamed Christians. He built a golden palace on the ruins. Rumors spread that he started the fire himself, just to clear space for his new villa. He denied it, then staged a dramatic reenactment of the blaze. Because why let tragedy go to waste? The Golden House of Delusion, Nero's new palace, the Domus Aurea, was a monument to madness. A rotating dining room powered by slaves. Walls covered in gold and jewels. A lake filled with scented water. Statues of himself in divine poses. He called it a gift to Rome. Rome called it a crime scene. The paranoia crescendo as Nero's reign continued. So did his paranoia. He executed his mother, poisoned his wife, banished philosophers, declared himself the reincarnation of Apollo. He once ordered a senator's death because the man yawned during a poem. His court became a theater of fear. Every compliment was rehearsed. Every smile was survival. The final act in 68 CE, rebellion erupted. Nero fled Rome, disguised in a cloak. Cornered and abandoned, he whispered, "What an artist dies in me," then took his own life. His death marked the end of the Julio-Claudian dynasty. Rome exhaled. The stage went dark. Marie Antoinette arrived in France at age 14, a glittering pawn in a political marriage to Louis XVI. She was charming, fashionable, and utterly unprepared for the snake pit of Versailles. She quickly became a fashion icon, a gossip magnet, a scapegoat for everything wrong with France. Her enemies called her Madame Deficit. Her friends called her fabulous. The hair that touched heaven. Marie's hairstyles weren't just big, they were architectural feats. She wore ships in full-sail gardens with live birds, sculptures of her children, a wig so tall it scraped the ceiling. One style required 3 hairdressers, scaffolding, and prayer. She once had a hairstyle themed around a recent naval victory. The admiral was flattered. The navy was confused. The cake controversy. The infamous quote, "Let them eat cake," was likely never said by Marie, but it stuck because it felt true. She lived in luxury while France starved. She hosted lavish balls, gambled at court, and built a private village, where she played shepherdess. Yes, she wore silk peasant dresses and milked perfumed cows. The peasants were not amused. The Queen of Risk Marie loved gambling. She bet on cards, dice, horse races, her own reputation. She once lost 500,000 livres in a single night. Louis XVI sighed. France groaned. She ordered another round. The Petit Trianon, Marie's escape from court, was the Petit Trianon, a private palace where etiquette was banned. Corsets were optional, gossip was mandatory. She hosted secret parties, wore scandalous gowns, and danced until dawn. It was Versailles without the politics, just powdered rebellion. The political blind spot. Marie wasn't stupid, she was strategically oblivious. She ignored bread riots, tax crises, revolutionary pamphlets. She believed her charm could outlast unrest. She believed Versailles was eternal. She believed France would never turn on her. Spoiler, it did. The fall of the Queen in 1789. The revolution exploded. Marie was arrested, imprisoned, and eventually executed by guillotine in 1793. Her final words. She apologized to the executioner for stepping on his foot, because even in death, she was polite, poised, and powdered. After years of Puritan rule under Oliver Cromwell, where dancing, theatre, and joy were banned, England was ready for a king who could throw a party. In 1660, Charles II returned from exile and brought with him laughter, laced liquor, and a royal court that felt more like a cabaret. He was nicknamed the Merry Monarch, and he earned it. The mistress department. Charles didn't just have mistresses, he had a mistress management system. Let's meet a few of the headliners. Barbara Villiers, volcanic temper, irresistible charm. She bore him 5 children, and once slapped a bishop for looking bored. Nell Gwynn, the people's favorite, a former orange seller turned actress. She was witty, warm, and famously shouted, "I'm the Protestant whore," to a hostile crowd. Louise Day, the French import, elegant, calculating, and possibly a spy. She sent pillow talk back to Versailles. Charles's fathered at least 17 illegitimate children, many of whom he gave titles, estates, and jobs they were wildly unqualified for. The spaniel sovereign Charles adored his King Charles spaniels so much, he let them roam freely through Cordovan during state meetings. One ambassador complained that a dog licked his boot mid-negotiation. Charles shrugged. The dog stayed. He once delayed signing a treaty because his favorite spaniel was asleep on the parchment. The Court of Velvet and Vice Charles's court was a sensory playground. Masquerade balls with masks, music, and mischief theatre revivals, including Shakespeare and scandalous new plays. Late-night salons where poets, philosophers, and mistresses mingled. He loved wit, wordplay, and women. He once said, "I am not made for long speeches, but short pleasures." The bedchamber, as Cabinet Charles often held court from bed. Literary ministers would kneel beside his mattress to deliver reports. He'd sip wine, stroke a spaniel, and occasionally interrupt with a joke or a flirtation. His decisions were impulsive, his policies inconsistent, but his charisma unmatched. The political tightrope. Despite the chaos, Charles was no fool. He navigated religious tension between Catholics and Protestants, a suspicious parliament, foreign alliances with France and the Dutch. He played both sides, made vague promises, and kept England mostly stable while partying like it was 1669. The Velvet exit. Charles died in 1685 after suffering a stroke. His final words, "Let not poor Nelly starve," a nod to his beloved mistress, Nell Gwynn. He was buried with royal honours and, probably a few dog hairs. As the 17th century gave way to the 18th, the age of merry monarchs began to dim. The powdered wigs remained, but the sparkle dulled. England saw William and Mary, who ruled with Protestant prudence, Queen Anne, who preferred politics to pillow talk, and a slow shift from royal whimsy to parliamentary power. The court became less cabaret, more committee, the ghosts of scandal. But oh, the echoes lingered. The secret passageways once used by mistresses now creaked with dust. The velvet drapes still held whispers of laughter and late-night rendezvous, and the portraits of Charles II, Henry VIII, and their ilk stared down with knowing smirks. Even as decorum rose, the memory of mischief remained. The legacy of lust and laughter. These kings didn't just rule, they performed. They turned monarchy into theatre, scandal into strategy, and pleasure into politics. Their legacies: illegitimate children with dukedoms, palaces built for seduction, and a nation that learned to laugh at power, even as it obeyed it. So now, dear dreamer, let's close the book. Picture a candle flickering in a forgotten chamber. The scent of old perfume lingers in the air. A spaniel snores softly on a velvet cushion. And somewhere, in the folds of time, a king chuckles in his sleep. Because history isn't just battles and treaties, it's bedtime stories with crowns and chaos. Tonight, you've wandered through powdered courts and perfumed scandals. You've met monarchs who ruled with charm, kissed with strategy, and slept like sovereigns. Now, let the velvet fog settle. Let the laughter fade into lullabies, and let the crown rest gently on the pillow beside you. Good night. The kings have played their part, and the stage is yours now.